Hi, here we are again for some daily JavaScript. And today I just thought I'd cover the for loop. It's sort of a staple JavaScript maneuver, and everybody's got to have this one down. It's pretty simple. If you're a beginner, it may not be as simple, but probably everybody else has seen it, but we'll just talk about it today. Here we go. So the for loop, what does it do? Well, it kind of looks like this. Okay, so there's your basic syntax. You got for, you got the parentheses to define a condition, and then you have a code block, which will contain a block of code that'll get repeated. So why would you use a for loop? Well, let's imagine, and we'll just do today's example in the console entirely. So let's imagine, you had a message here and you wanted to create some elements in the console. So, here maybe I'll just make a couple paragraph tags, right? I mean, these won't really be paragraphs in the page. They'll just be printed to the console. But, just as easily as we printed these to the console, we could also have printed them into our body tag or some other tag, right? But let's imagine, we wanted to do this and, we don't want to make one paragraph. We want to make like 5 paragraphs, right? So now we've got all this duplicate code here, and if I test, I got this in the browser here, and I'll refresh it. Oh, I got an error there. Let me go check that. I forgot I got to complete this. Let me comment that out, right? So we'll repeat it here. Yeah. So there's my paragraphs, right? I got 5 of them, and maybe I decide like, oh, these shouldn't be paragraphs, or maybe they need to include a class or something, right? And now I end up duplicating code, and this is a problem because now I need to copy that code and paste it every time, and this is a recipe for mistakes, okay? Right? I might type one of these differently, or put a different class name on it by accident. It's also hard to maintain large blocks of duplicate code. So, why would we want to do that when we could use the computer? I mean, the computer is made to do things like this. It's made to repeat stuff. The computer understands how to do the same thing over and over again repetitively, right? And so, it's even got a built-in system to do that, the for loop, right? So maybe we'll get rid of this, right? And then over here, what I want to do is I'm going to create a basic for loop, and then we'll talk about it. So let's say, I equals 0. Let's repeat while I is less than 5. And then we'll add 1 to I with each repeat. So here's our basic for loop. It's for parentheses, and then the curly brackets. And inside the parentheses, there's 3 parts, okay? And each one is separated by a semicolon. So the first part defines the initial value for the loop. This is kind of our initializer, right? And then the second part defines the condition. So this is the initializer, right? We're saying here that we're going to use a variable called I, and we're going to initialize it to a value of 0. And then here, this is our condition, and we're saying, hey, you know what? We're going to keep repeating as long as I is less than 5. Okay, so this is less than. Remember, the alligator eats the small half, so the small end of this, must be smaller than the large end, right? And then, this over here is our increment. So every time we loop, JavaScript's going to execute this block of code. Okay, and there's some kind of weird things you can do in here. This is sort of the standard way to use this, right? So let's imagine, let's do console.log, and we'll just log the value of I, right? And so we'll go back to our browser here and refresh. Now you can see it counts as 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? That's 5 repeats, okay? But what if we wanted to do that last example where we had the paragraphs, right? So in this case, I could log my paragraphs, or maybe print them to the page, or modify all of the paragraphs in some way, right? And if I test it now, you can see I've got 5 paragraphs. Now JavaScript, it sees that the console sees that I'm repeating this paragraph tag, and so it actually just says that this happened 5 times, right? So it's kind of just saving space in some cases here, right? So if it recognizes that we're doing the same thing multiple times, sometimes it'll do that, right? But that happened 5 times, right? And then, now if I want to modify this, like instead of, paragraphs, I want to do H1 tags, right? I only have to change one block of code. That's very efficient, right? And it reduces errors, okay? And maybe if I want to add a class name, I can put a class name in here, right? And we'll save and test again. And, that was saving me a lot of time. It was very easy for me to make that change, and then I can be sure that it's correct. And if this is not the correct class name, then I can just change it once right here, and there I'm done, right? So, the for loop can save us a lot of work, right? So what else can you do with the for loop? Let's do a couple things, right? So one of the things that happens in a for loop is before it gets to the end, we can also stop it early. So there's a line in here called break, right? So if we put the break in here, what that means is break the loop. So if the loop is running and it sees a break, then the loop ends early and quits. Let's give that a try. So if I just put a break in there, now you can see it prints one H1 tag, and then it saw the break and it stopped the loop early, right? What if what if we wanted a break on a certain condition? Like what if I say if, maybe we'll do another JavaScript thing on the if statement, right? But what if I say like if I is equal to 3, then break, right? So in this case, if I is not equal to 3, then we don't break, right? But if it's exactly 3, and we could even use the triple equal there, right? Then then we're going to break, right? Let's save that and we'll test. Now you can see this happened 4 times because 0, 1, 2, 3, and then it printed the number 3, and then it checked the condition, and it broke out of the loop, so it didn't print number 4, right? I mean, it did 0 through 3. That's 4 items, and right? Okay, that says 4 for the count, right? But I is was actually equal to 3 in that case, right? Let's actually print the I in here just for fun. What if we put a couple quotes there and put the I in here, right? And then we'll test it again, right? Oh, look, so there's 0, 1, 2, 3. I is equal to 3. Break the loop, right? So there's break, right? And yeah, the for loop is pretty cool. There's a lot of stuff you can do with this. Let's do a couple other things, right? So just to get goofy for a second here, these statements in here are optional, and there's actually, you can do almost anything in each of these places, okay? Let me do a goofy example, right? So, if you want, you can put a comma here, and you can say var j, or some other variable, equals 0, right? So now I can initialize 2 variables here, right? And then, oops, I got a thing there. I forgot we can't put var on the second one there, right? Because if you have var here, you can initialize multiple guys, right? Oh, there we go, right? So there, we got our loop, right? But we initialized j also, right? So then I can use j in here to do stuff, right? Let's get rid of the break for the moment, right? Maybe I want to, console log, another value based on, j and I together, right? So I want to say, let's say j plus equals, I times 2 or something, right? Something like that, right? Some, adding 2 times I to j, because that maybe does something mathematical for me in my code, right? I'll print that, and then you can see it's like 0, 2, 6, 12, 20, right? Where the I value is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Okay, so there's nothing stopping you from initializing multiple values in here. Okay, you can even modify the condition here. You can put just about anything in here, and then over here you can also put just about anything. Right? Let's do a really odd one. Right? I'm gonna put a comment in here for the moment, just so we suppress the output from this to the console. And let's do another for loop. So another way that you can work with the for loop is you can leave off the curly brackets here. And so then you can do things like this. You can say for the variable a, and you know the variable here, you often see I, but you can really use any name here. So maybe we'll even make that count, right? So I can say count equals 0. And then let's repeat while, count is less than, 3. And then over here, maybe I'll do console.log, so we can put just about anything here, as long as we're incrementing the value or making it possible for this value right here, this condition to become true at some point, then we're okay. If for some reason, this value never becomes true, then your for loop will run forever and essentially it will crash the browser. I mean, usually what happens is the browser sees that your script has executed, X number of times. I think after, 1,000 or 10,000 times, it throws up a warning message saying like, hey, the JavaScript here is becoming unresponsive. Do you want to quit it, right? But that's kind of bad. It means your program isn't functioning correctly, right? So yeah, so your loops can run on forever. I won't do an example of that here because doing the video would not be very good, right? We'd just be sitting there waiting while the script ran. But yeah, here we can say console, and maybe I'll put a message here. So we've got count beginning at 0. We're going to count as long as count is less than 3. And then here what we'll do is we'll say count colon, and then I'll say plus, and what I want to do here is I want to say count plus plus, right? So I'm actually gonna put this in parentheses just to make sure that the code does this first and then combines it with the string here, right? Let's give that a test. So I'll save this, get my browser back here, and then you can see here it prints out count is 0, count is 1, count is 2, and then our loop ends, right? And so here we did a for loop without even using the code block, right? Which is a little weird, but yeah, you can do that with the for loop, right? Let's comment that out for a moment, right? Let's try another one. So here's another goofy one, right? So there's nothing stopping you from doing this, right? Notice in here you can actually, like I said, these things were optional, right? Okay, so we have 3 parts, right? We have the initializer, semicolon, the condition, semicolon, and then the increment would go in the 3rd spot, right? And you don't even have to include any of those, right? Of course, we have to have some values or this for loop will just run forever. So, we could say for variable a equals, 0. Let's do something fun too here. Why don't we just say 5? And then we'll say, well, down in here in our loop, we'll say, hey, console.log a colon plus a, right? And then every time we loop, we'll say, a minus minus, right? Now we're going to count backwards. We're going to count down from a to from 5 to 0, right? So we'll say a minus minus, so that means subtract 1. And then we'll say like, hey, if, how about, a, right? Let's say if a is, greater than 0, we're kind of just doing the opposite of what we have here, right? And then if a is, actually let's do if a is, I guess actually we kind of have to do this. We'll say less than 0, and then we'll say break. All right, so now this should count to -1, right? From 5 to -1. something like that, right? Let's test it again here. Oh, look, there's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, and then, when a is -1, it's less than the 0, so the loop ends, right? So we're counting backwards, and in this one, it's a little weird. We don't have anything in the condition here, because maybe our loop is taking care of the condition, right? And the increment, right? You can define these things outside the loop, or maybe this data is coming in from somewhere else, right? Let's put another comment around this right here, and let's do another one, right? So the for loop is good. I actually like, for some reason, I always use this one, and there's another version of the for loop, like, we can say for, how about variable, I in, right? And we can count in something, right? And this is really good, if you have an array, right? So, I don't have an array here. Why don't we make one? We'll just say A, B, and C. So there's an array. So this is saying like, hey, for variable I in this array. So it means for each item in the array here, right? I is going to be the index of that element, okay? And so here we can say, because JavaScript is going to look at the array and say like, okay, well, here you have an object, a collection that has, it's a an object that contains multiple values, and it's going to say like, okay, well, the first value is index 0, so I is going to be 0, right? Do the loop. And then, here's the next item in the collection. Its index or position is position 1. Now we do the loop, and I will be 1. And then the last one, it'll say, okay, this guy's at index number 2, and so I will be 2. And then we'll do the code block again. And let's see, why don't we say console.log, and then we'll say, I here, and then we'll say, plus, I don't know. Well, we'll just put the I there for the moment, right? We're gonna have to move this out into a variable to be more useful, but let's give that a quick test, right? Oh, look, 0, 1, 2, right? So there's our array displayed. Let's do another one, right? So this looks pretty good. Why don't we move our array out here, and then we can get the value of each element, right? So we'll say for I in array, and then maybe here we'll do array bracket I, right? So this is the index of each element, and when we get the array, we can access each element by its index using the square brackets, right? So we'll give that a test here. Oh, look, so it's 0, 1, 2, and we can see ABC, right? And that's particularly good because I find this shorter and easier to type than to do this, which does the same thing, right? Here you could say for variable I equals 0, well, I is less than array.length, and then I plus plus, right? Like that's pretty long. Like this is very short and succinct, right? Kind of to the point, right? But this one here would do the same as the one above, right? So let's talk a little bit more about this for in loop, right? So here's our alternative version, right? Let's do another one. So if you have an object, and your object would look like this, and you might give it some property names, like maybe I'd call it like name, Joe, age 44, shoe size 9.5, right? And then if we say for variable, let's call it key this time. Remember, we can use any name for these variables. In object, what's going to happen here is key will be equal to the property name as a string for each property in the object, right? So key would, it'll loop, again, we have a collection, right? And it's got 3 items in it, 3 values, and each value is, associated with a key, right? This is the key name, right, or the property name. And now for in is going to look at each key value, assign that to the variable key in this case, and then, it's, this is telling it what object to look at, right? So let's try it. Let's say, what if we do console.log, and then we say, how about key is key, and then we'll say, value is object. And now to get the value, we'll say object bracket key, right? And we'll give that a test, right? Let me comment this one out so that doesn't go to the console, right? So there we go. Let's give that a test, right? We'll save this, refresh, and then you can see it says key is name, value is Joe, key is age, value is 44, key is shoe size, value 9, right? So that works pretty good, right? So the for loop is pretty interesting. There's a lot you can do with this. It's really useful. And again, anytime we have a lot of code that we want to repeat, or code that ends up being the same over and over again, using a for loop is going to save you time and energy. If you have a collection, like you're working with a collection like an array or an object, the key is a great way to search through that object, or look at each element on the object, or print each element in the object, right? Much easier than doing it one at a time. And especially in cases where, the array or the object might be dynamic and you don't know how many items are in there, or maybe the number of items changes over time, right? And so you want to, loop through every item there, but you don't know how many there are, right? So, in this case, using for in, you can easily just get all the items, right? And, like here I have 3 items, but, if I add another item, like, I don't know, let's add another item, like, how about ID equals, some random number, right? Oops, I did IS. Let's do ID, right? So I can just add this, and I really don't have to modify the code here because it's going to still print out the new key name and the new value, right? I don't have to really change anything. Let's give that another test here. Oh yeah, and there you can see there's my ID value in the console. So anyway, so that's it for maybe now. Maybe we'll go over some more ideas with this, but there's a few ideas with the for loop, right? And I hope that's helpful to someone, and thanks for watching.